Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski with Everything MSP here. Hope everybody is having a great day. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We've got a very special day, very exciting day. Lots of security discussions that we're going to have, and a couple things I just want to kick things off with. Is we all know that cyber attacks are not slowing down. In fact, they're accelerating. They're more targeted. They're all more automated. And of course, we all have heard that AI term, AI, and they're fueled by AI, and which is making things even more challenging. So this isn't just an IT issue anymore. It's all about business risk. And again, as we talk to our decision makers, it's about that business risk that we need to be addressing with them. And because it's not a matter of if you will be targeted, it's a matter of whether you're prepared when it happens. And that's why today's session matters. We're going to dive deep into the key findings from the 2026 OpenText Threat Report, what's changing in the threat landscape, and what MSP and IT leaders need to do differently right now. And to break all of this down, I've got Tyler Moffitt and also Mr. Mike DePalma, and they're both with OpenText Cybersecurity. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Great over my end, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing awesome. How about you, Tyler? Tyler, I think you're muted.
Good call. I was doing that just in case I didn't have any echo or anything, but doing well. Thanks for having us on, Dan.
It's great to have you guys here. And, as we know, it doesn't matter what day it is, doesn't matter what month it is, what year it is. Cybersecurity is such a critical area. And as I talked about, cybersecurity threats are only accelerating. And you guys have put together a very extensive report that we're gonna talk about. But I guess for one of the two of you, just real quick before we kick things off and share your slide deck, what would you say was one of the most interesting findings from this report that you could share with us?
Sure. I guess I'll go first here. I definitely thought it was interesting the severity of attack on the small to medium-sized business and the overconfidence that they have, for sure.
Yeah, it was that that gap, that confidence gap between with the folks that thought they were protected and the ones that could recover, but also the uptick 2 years in a row of small business attacks. We had that precipitous drop after COVID, and now it's steadily gone up, and it doesn't look on a numbers basis that high, but percentage wise it's going up pretty quickly, which is the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this: that gap of that overconfidence, was that related to nobody's going to attack me? Is it more we have everything that we need in place, we're secure, or is it all the above?
Definitely a little bit of all the above. When it comes down to sort of filling out how they feel, how prepared they feel that they are, and doing sort of a recollection of all the things they would think they would need when it comes to like cybersecurity vegetables and doing basics. But then when it came down to actually showing in tabletop exercises, the difference was staggering.
Interesting. And so why don't we let's kick things off. We'll go full steam ahead. You can go ahead and share your screen there. And
sounds good.
It's coming up. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, I guess I'll just get started. So my background here is about 15 years in engineering, classifying malware in a database, and then moved on to marketing to help out, various orgs to make sure, create content and do reports. So our flagship report come out with every year, and we're going to dive right in and go through all the different types of stats. We got multiple sections here. I'm going to start off with malware. Probably the most obvious and easiest 800-pound gorilla in the room. And basically we saw, it's good to break it down between business and consumers because it does vary. There is differences you'll see not only from a infection rate, but also from a geographical standpoint. And just when you're talking about PCs of a consumer, PCs of a business. Obviously, we're all humans that may work on a business PC and then have different behaviors when we use on a consumer PC. And so you will see a difference here as far as the infection rates. It is climbing. I think this is what Mike is referring to. We sort of hit bottom around COVID, and now we're increasing. And so the rate of increasing, is quite large. And so while, we're going the wrong way, AI isn't helping for sure. We're going to talk about AI multiple different times, and there definitely is some attributes you can clearly give to AI as to why a lot of this is happening. But with business PCs, you're always going to see overall every year. We have never seen business PCs have a higher rate of infections over consumers, and that's just purely from the type of content and the type of behaviors differences between consumers and businesses, and also the setup, right? The layered security approach that most businesses understand that you need to protect, and the full layout and IT stack that's going to be equipped, and group policies, you name it. The environment itself is going to be different based on those business and consumer PCs. And one thing that's interesting that we want to talk about is location distribution, right? So the folders that malware executes out of. And what's interesting here is the majority for both is the downloads folder. And you might think, wow, that sounds like a 2005 stat. Everybody's just downloading the malware and then double clicking on it, and that's a 2026 stat. So feels like it's, something we should be further along. And you would assume, at least when I was researching malware in a database, temp and app data were definitely some of the strongest. I would say app data was number one, but things have actually shifted in the past few years to where downloads is now the number one folder. So really just illustrating the tactics and the success that a lot of these phishing are working so well that they're getting users to download the files and then run them from the actual downloads folder, which is requiring a user to actually click on it. And then also desktop, I would say similar tactics and similar sort of, tricks that are befalling, the lack of education or not enough education. Obviously, no matter how much education you do, you're never going to be 100% effectiveness, and you're still going to have employees sort of fail and get caught. But it's increasing. That makes sense. We're not decreasing that stat. That stat is getting harder and harder to bring down, if that makes sense. And then here's another great stat that Mike I know was talking about, was the infection rates by business size. So you can see the largest percent rate increase year over year is the medium size, so the 21 to 100 PC businesses. It's a 39% increase. And then the next biggest increase was super small businesses at 1 to 20 PCs, right? Which in many cases are set up almost like a home network, right? And usually, like, maybe there isn't even a dedicated IT guy. It might just be the person who's most tech savvy buying consumer grade equipment and running it from there when you first start out, grassroots, and that criminals prey on that, because if you're set up like a home PC network, yet you have more cash in the bank, well, obviously it's going to be as much and as large as payments or ransoms, if you will, as any other, medium or large size enterprise, of course. But how much easier it is to break in and then get out, and the money you're able to get, return on investment, the criminals have found is actually in that small to medium sized business. And we're going to go pretty deep there and explaining and showcasing what we mean by those stats, because there's a lot of them supporting it for sure.
Yeah. Tyler, I just want to jump in. I'm going to go back
interrupt
a few. Back when you were talking about consumer versus, business PCs, it got me thinking, a lot of times, we've all heard, clients say, hey, I know how to use my computer at the office because I know what my functions are. But when I get home, I don't know what I'm really doing, So it got me thinking when you brought that up. I wonder what that experience and the risks are where, hopefully their business PCs are more secure than,
Yep.
well, I mean, they both should be secure, right? But
right.
hopefully on the business side, they definitely are more secure. But, if on the consumer side and their home computer, things could be popping up that they're just not used to, and they're clicking on things, and, they might be more at risk of infecting themselves, and they might be using that computer for, work, just open up a browser and getting into things. So which only puts more risk towards that business. And
That's right.
So just kind of an interesting take on that.
Yeah, the BYOD is definitely a big issue and hurdle, especially for
Yeah.
small to medium-sized businesses that maybe can't tackle it the way an enterprise would. And so you really are susceptible to how that user has security set up on their home box. And yeah, you're right. You would be subject to the consumer PC infection rates in your business environment. And so that's definitely a consideration that should be have, and um, policies that should be put into place to sort of like an onboarding, if that makes sense. And I know that sounds very uh, medium to large size business type of
Right.
terminology, and so for the small businesses, that can be tough to sort of tackle, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
for sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I was just something that you caught my attention there. So
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good point to bring up. When you're a super small business and you want to have flexibility and get the best talent you possibly can, remote work is, going to be considered at all times. And when you have people running their own personal machines, you really don't have that much of a say, especially when you're that small, for sure. And moving on to malware infections by geographic regions, people love the heat maps. You'll see here, people might have assumed that, it might be, you would, where do you get the most infections, right? Or infection rates. A lot of times I get people assume just in North America or UK, right? And, or Europe, and it's not. The riskiest regions as far as encountering infection is actually the Middle East. And then Asia and Africa are sort of, and this is not new, if that makes sense. We've been running the heat map for probably 5-6 years now, and this is pretty much the worst, riskiest regions, and it's not necessarily a habit or habitual choice from the people in those regions. It's not a culture decision or deciding factor. It's actually a hardware deciding factor. These regions run the oldest, most out-of-date operating systems, many of which are basically end of life. If you guys listening aren't aware, Windows 10 is actually end of life. It ended of life back in October of last year, and
yeah,
many people for free. If you check the box and agreed and click next, okay, you got an extra year, but you had to actually do that. And so, how many people maybe are running hardware in a corporate environment or small to medium sized business environment where maybe you didn't check that box or didn't you have to do it on every machine, and it's end of life. And end of life is a big problem because that means exploits will ruin your day, and the number of exploits that work on that operating system only grow, right? It'll never shrink because they're no longer supported, they're no longer receiving these security patches and updates. And we're not just talking about stuff that's end of life 5 months ago and in October. We're talking about stuff that's like been end of life for years or even decades. So let's
yeah,
filter it down even further and look at regions as far as consumer devices and in business devices. This is different as well. It's not the same all the way up every country, if that makes sense. To give you an example of a standout, Europe. Europe only has an infection rate of business devices at 2.6%. But when it comes to consumer devices, 7.7%. So they're way up there in the risky region, like with Asia and Africa, if that makes sense. Obviously not as high as Middle East at 16.6%. They keep going the other direction. For the most part, most countries actually year over year decrease a little bit. But the Middle East was like 13% last year, and they're at 16% this year. So definitely struggling from a consumer perspective in the Middle East. But you can see here that it is quite a big difference from the difference of consumer to business devices, and does vary based on where you're at. And we have even further doubling down in double clicking into the data, right? So industry verticals. People like to know industry verticals. And so the line down the center here is the average rate of infection. The average rate of infection is just below 9%. So 9% chance is the average. And so the ones at the top of the dark blue are percent increase above the average, above the baseline, right? And then the ones here in the light blue at the bottom are below the baseline, so under average. So let's drill down on all the industries that are above average. I'll zoom them out so you don't have to squint your eyes. Manufacturing, clear and cut, number one, right? At 31.4% above the average baseline. And management of companies and enterprises is number three there at 27.1. That would be sort of the MSP for sure. And educational services at 28.8%. So definitely the top three targeted industries. They like going after it, not just manufacturing. is big just because of the type of environment they're going after is usually less secure and higher pressure as far as to pay the ransom quickly, because thinking downstream, thinking supply chain here, manufacturing operations usually are supplying the companies, and those companies, everything halts, right? It all leads to the manufacturer who needs to be up and running like next day, yesterday, and so that's why it's a big target. And then MSPs, management of companies and enterprises, because of the pivot downstream. If you compromise, an MSP, that MSP might only be like 50 employees or less, but the amount of customers they have and the machines they have access to through the RMM tools or whatever they're using, it could be tens of thousands of machines. And there are ransomware groups out there that literally only target MSPs. Play Ransomware is one of them. And so that's where you sort of see this sort of breakdown as far as top industry verticals and who's being targeted. And then also in the which industry verticals do a better job, you'll see sort of real estate and finance, and even healthcare kind of there a little bit. Healthcare is doing better and better. It was sort of a more targeted industry, or industry that was more susceptible. Some of these industries, when they're high up there, it's not necessarily that they're being picked out and chosen, let's go after healthcare. It's not nothing to do with that. It's many of the times the type of overlap of hardware, or like Cisco firewalls or ASA, whatever, like, Sonic Wall, whatever type of exact hardware they're running, and the policies they're using to keep that up to date and patched aren't that great. And so like Akira ransomware in 2024 and 2025 hit a lot of healthcare individuals or companies purely because of the hardware that they ran wasn't patched, and their exploits just worked, and they just sort of blanket spray and pray anybody that hits this exploit, or susceptible to it. That's who we compromise, and they happen to overlap and be predominantly healthcare industry. So that's how some of these people show up in these areas. Definitely interesting though to see, which industries are targeted more or happen to end up being targeted more. And now let's get into what I was talking about with the OS breakdown by industry. Right. And so
can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found interesting is when we take a look at manufacturing being at the top of that list, one of the things that really is scary is that lots of manufacturing organizations hang on to their line of business software much longer than they should. They're sticking with current versions because it's tried and true. It's what they're used to. They might have heavy customization. So, they're not updating their line of business software, which puts them at even greater risk. So when we take a look at those malware infections, with manufacturing being at the top, that just makes it even more, risky for those type of organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't see manufacturing not being in the top three for the foreseeable future. Something would have to change. I don't see it. And then, and a big reason why, they're top of the list here. OS breakdown by industry. You can see here, Windows 11 is the only current supported operating system. I don't know of a time other than 1985, when they first released Windows, that only one operating system was supported. And so Windows 10 still has the highest adoption rate, and it's end of life. And what percentage of the people on Windows 10 have all agreed and gone through the hoops to get that extra year? And then come next year, when I do next year's report, there will be no more support and extensions. Who knows? Maybe they'll come in 0 hour and provide something. But as of right now, they're really just trying to gun for everybody to move to Windows 11. And it's a harder ask for some of these organizations, some of these industries or verticals specifically, like educational, healthcare, manufacturing. They definitely struggle with it, right, as far as adoption rate. And specifically, Windows Vista and older, at 20.23%, that's kind of crazy when we talk about how old Windows Vista is, that being like 20 years old. Literally, I think it's 20 years old, Windows Vista. And no one even really ran Vista. No one liked Vista. Everybody ran XP. So, in fact, to give you the numbers here that aren't shown, of that 0.23%, 0.22 is Windows XP. So we still have over a fifth, almost 1/4% of manufacturers running Windows XP. And I'm guessing that's like SCADA, like type of like chemical control processing plants, stuff like that, that was built with Windows XP and they've never changed it. And they're like, oh, it's not connected to the internet or it's on a VLAN or something. And they feel like that's protected or that's safe, but it's still a big giant problem. And that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah. When you started, asked us, Dan, what are some surprising findings? Like this slide is pretty surprising. Like the last 3 slides to me are the ones that MSPs should be putting in front of every client and in front of, it doesn't matter the industry because it's just correlated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what's the common theme with manufacturing? Well, there's still half of them or more still on Windows 10. And you think about the hundreds of thousands of manufacturing companies out there, that small percentage might look small, but the actual manufacturing companies is a big number. It's just low hanging fruit. So for me, this is the kind of stuff I would be putting out to all of my clients. If I'm doing a lunch and learn, put this right in front of them. There's a correlation between what you need to do. And we'll get into some of this confidence stats later on, but I don't know. I love those 3. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You're able to just see what's the common theme. Well, this is one of them,
Absolutely. And this is a great part and slide to talk about the MSP takeaway here, and what you can do. Patching is huge. Like patching isn't anything big or new or revolutionary I'm bringing to the table of this new thing that came out. Like this is eating your cybersecurity vegetables basics. Yet we have to talk about it every time because people are still struggling with it, right? The OS lifecycle tracking, huge as well. Vulnerability visibility. I mean, these are all sort of related and tied together, right? Cybersecurity vegetables, and then layered security, right? Stacking, making sure you have security awareness training, endpoint protection, DNS and web filtering, email security. None of these layers are 100%. And anybody telling you they have a layer of one of these that's 100% is selling you snake oil, doesn't know what they're talking about. But it's the combination of these layers together where you're trying to reduce that, that percentage, that 0% infection rate. It's a unicorn, and you'll never achieve it. But the posture that you have and the layered security of installing each one of those layers is the posture to try and achieve as close as you can. That's the type of approach you want to have at it. Mike, anything else you have here?
Yeah, I was at event, Robin Robbins boot camp, and I had a guy come up and he was, I'm just starting an MSP. Like, what should I start out with? And clearly, like, this is the baseline of an MSP stack, right? But I think, again, a lot of businesses, they don't know what they have. So for an MSP, a lot of times you have to show them those stats and then say, but here's why I'm protecting, here's how I'm protecting you. Here's the multi-layered approach. Because we live and breathe it every day. And this might seem like super common sense. It clearly isn't based on the stats we've just seen. So sometimes for an MSP, it's as simple as just breaking it down. Like, yeah, there's these scary stats, but what do I do for my clients to make sure you're not one of those statistics? Here it is. Boom, 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 boom. And sometimes you have to really simplify it to explain it to these businesses.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. So we're done with malware. And now let's talk about phishing, obviously related as well, but it's got its own little category in our report, and lots of things we're going to share. And so everything we're sharing, just so you know, is pulled directly from the threat report or directly from the MSP playbook, which we'll give out as links later as well. Very useful stuff to have. And so phishing, number go up. All right, this is the entirety of last year and where we saw things. And I just want you to know that just the numbers, the flat numbers that we saw last year were a 206% increase on the previous year. And so I have never seen an increase that high before. And I've been researching phishing for like 15 years now. And so every year, phishing has seen a year-over-year double-digit increase. Phishing has never gone down. It is the most cost-effective, whether you're spray and pray or you're spear and phishing, whatever you're doing, it's very effective, and it's only getting more effective. And AI comes into play. In fact, AI is the reason why we're seeing spear phishing gain on phishing. So it used to be for the longest time, or I should say, I guess 3 to 5 years, it's been about, of all phishing, about half are crafted spear phishing, right? And then the other half is spray and pray. Everybody gets the same template. And now we're approaching the last couple months of last year. About 84% of all phishing was spear phishing. So we're now getting to the point where it's so easy with AI to collect and scrape all that data because you posted it on social media, where you're, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. You're giving all that information, whether it's where you're eating, who you work for, charities you like, or you're giving all that information out for them to use to be able to craft a really easy to spoof now phishing, and make it seem, because gone are the days now where you have any sort of indicators of, oh, this is potentially fake because they misspelled this, or the syntax is wrong, or they don't know the custom. Like all that stuff is taken out because of AI. And so
or
this
it's
is where we're at.
or it's completely unrelated to me, right? Where is now, if there is some type of malware that's capturing your persona from ChatGPT or from Claude or whatever, we know when you use those tools, it knows who you are and it's developing this persona. And if it's able to capture that and become more sophisticated in delivering that to you, that's scary as hell.
Yep. And that's what we're saying. And that's really honestly the first place that we would even assume AI is going to help out in the criminals. So when we're seeing it, if that makes sense. So we'll see what the next few years is going to have with AI and every other impact. So now looking at attribution, and I will say, like, take this with a grain of salt. We have these numbers, obviously USA at over 41% here. That's, it's difficult to really attribute origin of malware. When really, like, you have to realize it's just preference of where they wish to host the malware, right? There are many small or medium-sized businesses out there that'll just geo-filter out, like China, Korea, Russia, all these places that you would suspect many malware would come from. And so if they wish to attack these businesses, they're going to make sure that they leverage widely used cloud and hosting services in the United States or wherever, to increase the likelihood of successful delivery, right? And then you're still seeing Vietnam, China, Hong Kong. These are usually provide less regulated hosting environments as well, and so it's still interesting to see, but it doesn't mean that all attackers are coming from the United States, if that makes sense. Like, many of these are going to be Russia and China hosting the malware in the United States. Hope that makes sense.
But I
Right.
think that's important because that geolocation, a lot of times they figure that makes them completely safe, right? We're blocking anything that's coming from those countries,
Right.
So that's against that false sense of security. They don't realize that this is actually how the criminals are snaking their way around it.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. And so, talking about also attachments, zip, 7-zip, like, that's almost 40%, right? And they know that basically compressing the payloads is going to help evade email scanning or bypass security controls to try and hide the true file contents. This is where we see a lot of the downloads folder coming into play, right? And so this distribution definitely reinforces the need for a little more advanced email security and attachment inspection and things like that. And maybe even considering a blanket blacklisting or blocking certain file type extensions, like saving vector image SVGs. You don't really need those, but 6.4%, like, you could just rule out 6.4% of all malware if you were just to write a policy to not even allow anything like that. These are stuff to consider, and it's all the details of it, I would say, are in the report. So if you want to know more about that, definitely read the report. But definitely interesting for sure. And then looking at top 10 online abuse services, you see that Google is far away number one at almost half, at 47, a little over 47%, right? Attackers are just going to exploit, trusted ecosystems to host their malicious content, distribute phishing pages, and facilitate, command and control communication between the payloads and stuff that they want. And so, second would be, what is that? Windows, and then Amazon. So really, like, over 2/3, 75, 80%, is literally just Google, Windows, and Amazon. Big shock there for sure. But that's what we're seeing, and definitely something you want to consider as far as battling this. Behavioral and identity focused security controls. I would say identity is definitely the new perimeter. You want to make sure that when you're treating it as such. And so here's a takeaway we have. Multi-factor authentication is definitely huge. I really like the conditional access. It's the reduced admin privileges. Like, I feel like there's over granting of access and permissions, and even the time to live on some of the access. Some of the times when what you grant from an MFA, you have a push request and it's like you're authenticated for a week. That's a problem. Things like that need to change. And so it's there's a lot to tackle. We're going to see a lot as far as the changing of security approach when it comes to the fact that identity is the new perimeter. Most offenses include like phishing-resistant MFA, conditional access policies, and evaluate user behavior. Elimination of legacy authentication protocols, that bypass sort of modern protections. Additionally, hardening mailbox configurations, enforcing strict identity recovery processes helps prevent attackers from maintaining persistent after compromise. There's a big popular, it was made popular by Scattered Spider last year, like September. They basically pretend to be an employee, usually through AI assisted, gathering of data on this employee that they wish to impersonate. They call up the IT help desk, pretending to be this employee. They give enough info to convince the IT help desk that they are that employee, and then they reset their passwords in their back end, and then that's the foothold. And so, got to be sort of some hardening protocols around that and making sure that that's less likely to happen, because a lot of them are fairly lax, if that makes sense. Any
And the
thing
thing
else
I think,
you want to cover, please?
yeah, I was gonna say, and the thing that, and Dan, you could jump on this. The thing about this slide is like none of these things are expensive. It's not like you're going to your clients and asking them for a blank check to do all the security things. Like this thing is just built into
Right.
your plan, right? And I think again, as you're having conversations with clients and you're an MSP, like, look, these are the standards that we have to follow, right? Because this will vastly reduce the rate of any of these phishing attacks coming through. And it's not like you're asking them for a big chunk of new money. You're asking them for their time and their commitment and the standardization. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And when we focus on business risk, I mean, we're getting, we have a lot of technical aspects that we can cover with our clients. But, when we really focus on that business risk and help them to understand that, okay, this is what could happen to your organization. These are the type of things that could have, tremendous impact. And these are, non-negotiable type of things that we need to put in place to protect you. We just need to shift that conversation and ensure that, we're delivering that information the right way on the risk side.
For sure. Absolutely. Next, we're going to talk about is everybody wants to hear about, because it's the noisiest 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is ransomware for sure. And we're going to cover a lot. So I'm going to start with the number go up for criminals section, and then we'll talk about what's actually going on as far as the good guys going after the bad guys. And then we'll talk about obviously some strategies and things and actionable insights and takeaways you guys can have as well. So right now, let's look at payments. Numbers are pretty nasty here. The average ransom payment is a house, and the median ransom payment is a small house or in a cheaper area. It's while these numbers are definitely inflated a little from the sense of large scale businesses being hit with 9-figure ransoms. For the most part, it is still, above. It's still 6 figures, even for these small to medium-sized businesses. And a lot of the times when they hit you, they know how much money you have in the bank. They've compromised. They've looked at a lot of the information you have. They've taken and exfiltrated anything identifiable or would pose maybe data privacy governing laws like GDPR, CCPA, you name it. Anything that would, impose potentially a fine from those data privacy governing regulators. And they use it as sort of a marketing tool, being like, pay a fine that's around the same price, or pay us and sweep it under the rug and no one knows about it. Because in addition to paying a fine, when you're victim of a breach that becomes public, you're also, damage to brand, reputation, crisis comms, communications, shareholders, you name it, all that nightmare stuff that no one wants to do, that it makes the appeal of just paying and sweeping under the rug. And so that big sharp dip we have in Q2 of 2025, it was over 1 million for the average. And then we had Operation Endgame, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later and to show you why it crashed down so hard. But even with the crashes and the peaks and valleys, I mean, you zoom out here and you look at it year over year. I anticipate that for the 2027 threat report next year, if I come back to present to you guys, we're going to be at higher numbers. Even with some more peaks and valleys, we basically don't ever get to a year or a full calendar year without seeing a new all-time high, even with these dips, if that makes sense. So I anticipate being at higher numbers next year. Industries impacted. You can see here that number one is professional services, and this is where MSPs would sit. So you're in the top sector, literally the top industry, and then healthcare is number two here. And so you'll notice that that's a big chunk, right? Almost 20%. And again, that's due to return on investment. That's literally the scope and impact they're able to get targeting professional services. Is why it is a focus for them. And it goes hand in hand with the size of companies impacted by ransomware. Obviously, the big giant headlines talking about $70 million ransom being paid from a 10,000 or 100,000 employee company are going to grab all the headlines. And that's what's going to be the noisy jump up and down and scream stuff. But really in reality, like most of the actual bread and butter hits for these ransomware as a service campaign or the cyber criminal ecosystem is actually going after the 1 to 1,000 or even 1 to 100 is over 40%. Over 40% is just 1 to 100, and then over 70% is up to 1,000. And so you really see here the biggest chunk is the groups that MSPs take care of. So it's definitely interesting and important to know, where the focus is and the target eyes for these criminals.
Tyler, what would your recommendation be? As we have this data, and we do know that the small, mid-sized organizations don't get the headlines. It's the big enterprise, and that's what we have. So when an MSP is working with an SMB, and to share results from enterprise, it's great, but what's the recommendation for them to be able to illustrate this and bring it down to the level of an SMB and the impact?
Well, honestly, like education is huge, being able to sort of illustrate to them. And so that's a lot of my role is actually going out and presenting to them, doing lunch and learns or doing explanations and showing them, here's the threat landscape, guys. You guys probably assume like there's no way. I tell them, learn as much as you can, educate yourself as much as possible, be abreast of what's changing in the threat landscape. I don't know how to force them to educate themselves. It is difficult. We try as best as we can through our means, and we'll show you some resources we have that we're constantly pushing and keeping up to date, and like threat intel hubs and making sure that, education campaigns in the sense of, security awareness training. Some of those aren't just phishing simulations. Some of those are like, hey, learning about new types of tactics here. And I'm going to cover some later on as well. But that is a tough one. How do you get the actual, end user or customer for the MSP to educate themselves and understand that they are the target? Because you're right, they assume they're not. And that's a great question. And I don't really have a great answer beyond coming and attending webinars.
Well, I would say, it's explaining the why, because you throw stats out there. I think you put it into terms that just about any business would understand. Like, all right, whatever business you're in, what's your ideal customer profile, right? You're talking to business. Well, get in the mindset of these criminals. Why are those two big groups the ideal customer profile? Well, one, a lot of times the smaller businesses aren't protected. Two, they have a higher rate of paying because they can't be down. Three, like an MSP, well, hey, now you can get into a whole bunch more clients. And if the business owners start to understand it in that way, like, hey, we're competing against businesses that are attacking us, and they understand why they are in that grouping, because there's so much more business out there, then I think they start to understand a little bit better. That's how I try to position when I'm out at lunch and learns and things like that.
It's a good idea. I appreciate, I see your perspective on where to focus, if that makes sense. And moving on to ransomware attack vectors, this is the first known vector. There could be multiple that led to the breach or was involved in the ultimate ransomware attack, if that makes sense. But the first known is the highest right now is remote access compromise, and the next is sort of phishing and software vulnerability. But for the longest time, it was just remote access and phishing fighting between it. And it used to be back in the day, it was just remote in using like Windows remote desktop port 3389, and you just brute force. Now people are a little more, onto that and understand that. But you can still phish for those credentials to log in. And so that's sort of what we're seeing. And that's why phishing and remote access are definitely the most common ways to get in to an environment. And so while a lot of this was number go up for criminals, everything's going well for the criminal underground ecosystem, I do love sharing this slide where we're at the lowest point we've ever seen as far as what percentage of people actually pay for the ransom. We're at 20%, which is great because you look back at like 2019 when a lot of government municipalities and healthcare, education, you name it, manufacturing were getting wrecked. 85% of them were hitting because they really had no option. They hadn't really prepared and set up for this, and sort of were in the chokehold. And now we're at 20%. And so we're never going to get this number down to zero. I don't even know if we'll get it down to 10, 15%. But this is a winning trend, if that makes sense, showing that people are taking it seriously. Hopefully their budgets are increasing because they understand the importance of taking this seriously. But a new tactic is out right now, and that is data exfiltration only. So no ransom, no noisy payload, encrypting the files, and then offering you money to get the files back, but just taking the data just for the implications of a leak site, right? This is the damage to brand, reputation, crisis comms, holder informing the shareholders that they've been breached, or their data is potentially out there. Nobody likes dealing with that. And so there will be companies, even if they have adequate backups and adequate means to restore everything, just the fact that they have the data does have a higher return or increase in chance of them paying the actual ransom. So we've seen some groups like Dark Angels move specifically into data exfiltration only. Shiny Hunters is also a big one as well. But there's still enough payment here to have them be thriving and working business model for the criminals, if that makes sense.
Great comment from Andre, and Andre says, finally, we have the stats that are relevant to the SMB community, and that's awesome. So
good.
Everybody else listening, these we will be sharing shortly 3 different links to these reports, and so you all can use this and go out to your clients, your prospects, and leverage this information in presenting to them.
Good stuff. So one thing to take away here for ransomware, this is that gap Mike and I were talking about. 95% believe they can recover from ransomware, but only 15% actually manage to restore their data. Definitely interesting. Huge gap, to be honest. Mike, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I mean, this again, I come from the world of backups. We've been talking about these numbers, but it's crazy that number is the gap is actually growing, which is surprising to me. That the fact that 95% and only 15% can actually do it. This is another slide you got to get in front of your clients and prospects. And this is why you have to outsource this stuff. This is why internally, you can have all the confidence in the world because some sales rep sold you some great product, but with an MSP not vetting those products and ensuring the integrations and all that stuff, that's why these numbers are so stark. So a slide like this, Andre just talked about numbers that apply. Like, take this slide and put it right in front of your client's face, but you know what I mean, and say, look, these are the real numbers here. Look at that gap. I'm trying to get you out of that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And those of you wondering, once we give you the links, this is from the MSP playbook, which accompanies the threat report, and sort of pulls out the specific actionable items for MSPs and what the threat landscape report that we gave, what does it mean to you and what can you do? All right, so moving along here, because we've got about 15 more minutes with about 16, 17 slides. Operation Endgame. This was basically good guys going after bad guys, and I won't lie, it feels like since ransomware came out in 2013, 13 years ago, the criminals have just been able to just run uninhibited. And so this past year was the most I had ever seen good guys actually get a one-up on the bad guys, and they did a really good job here. So what they did is they didn't actually go after, which they had previously done, going after specific actors who were doing like number 1 or number 2 in sort of like the number of hits. They didn't actually go after the developers or a single group, if that makes sense, as far as their infrastructure. Instead, they went after the loaders, specifically like the command and control servers, the first stage payloads that enable the rest of ransomware, if that makes sense. So they sort of did like an Uno reverse. We're going to supply chain you and go after and shut down these first stage payloads that originally create the foothold in the environment, that download more hacking tools to move laterally, gain permissions, and then eventually drop the final payload, which is the noisy one, which is ransomware, right? So they went after the first stage ones, because if those don't even work, right, if those are cut down, then that's it, right? So this is sort of like counterinsurgency, but they did a good job. They went after Bumblebee, Ice ID, Trick Lots, Smoke Loader. They seized like over 20 million in cryptocurrency. It was a really, really good job to go after this. And the reason why it's important in going after the loaders is the kill chain, right? These are the enablers, right? The small stealthy infections that are used to drop the larger scary payloads like ransomware, right? And so if you break this link and stop these loaders, ransomware deployment isn't going to happen. And so when you have these loaders out of commission, the ability to gain initial access, especially at scale, is basically just reduced. And so now affiliates are left with, you have to build your own tooling, which is very, very hard. Most of them just rely on developers and raise their hand. They're like, give me your really well engineered payload and command and control server access, and we'll just do profit sharing. And so that's all gone, right? Or they have to now buy from lesser known actors that weren't targeted, which is way more risky. So it shifts tactics entirely, and it really weakened the ransomware as a service economy. Very important. And this brings us to identity warfare and credential theft. So one thing that we're seeing a lot now, and sort of grow into a full epidemic, would be the info stealers. These little small, that first stage payloads that are scraping and I don't know if you guys know this, but the cookies and the OAuth tokens, they bypass MFA and password resets. If you come in and reset someone's password, but you have an OAuth token that authorized for that session, and someone steals that OAuth token, and that, let's say that token is authorized for a few days, they can then sell that day. Someone then can use that token, log right in, even if the password's been changed and it's authenticated. That's what's crazy. And we're sort of seeing initial access brokers. This is what they do. They don't even care about ransomware anymore. They will go in, steal those cookies, steal those OAuth tokens, sell them on the black market, essentially for, pennies on the dollar. Well, they're a few dollars, but and you're buying access to it. And so depending on your time to live, on the sort of the dwell time, the lifetime of these tokens is what they're worth. Because a lot of the times now people are just logging in. They're not even breaking into the environment. They've bought access and they're immediately going and logging right in, and then from there they're already in, and they have a foothold. They can move laterally and wait for a domain controller, admin to log in, and gather the keystrokes from the keyboard, and then they have the password of the domain controller, and then from there it's game over. And so this is stuff that you really want to watch out for, because it's very simple, light, stealthy payload, and it just leads to absolute havoc, and they sell it on the dark web, and this is a whole economy in itself. And so one of the ways they're gathering this, and I want to show you guys, if you're not aware, ClickFix. If you've never heard of ClickFix, I'm glad I get to show you. It's very reminiscent of the macros, right? In the Word document, you would open it up and it'd be like, this has, protected content, click enable content to view the message. And it was always like, you're being sued, you've missed a package, blah, 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 whatever the season is tactic. And you would enable content, which enables a macro, which would enable a script. They're doing the same thing here. They want to run a script. And this script specifically, it's like, I'm sure you guys have been to Cloudflare or had a Cloudflare protected website where it wants you to verify you're a human, click check and verify you're a human. How about this? How about instead of clicking verify you're a human, Cloudflare says, press the Windows R key and then Control V. And then you Control V and it copies that command there, which then launches PowerShell to download. This one specifically is Lumra Stealer. And so, yeah, this is how many of you have employees that you protect or you're responsible for that you think would fall for this? And it's super nasty because a lot of the times it's using PowerShell, which is in many cases a whitelisted process on the box. It's using law bins, lay of the land binaries, living off the land binaries is what it's called. But yeah, this is a new tactic, so it's just something to watch out for. User education for sure. And obviously DNS protection can help block these web pages from even showing up, but it's just something to be aware of, right? And AI powered social engineering is definitely where AI is coming in to, I would say, entering its, attackers aren't really waiting for AI to mature. They're sort of already using it, already maturing it. The phishing emails we talked about, they're already flawless. Impersonation is precise. The authority can be synthetically generated. And now cases we see the voice cloning, that's where we're really struggling now, because a lot of the times they can sound like your CFO or your CEO, and you have to get procedural with like verification. Now I think Ferrari was going to be hit with there was I think $50 million they were going to be paying or something, and they wanted to change the bank account last minute, and they were going to, and because the CFO called, the person responsible for changing that, and they had asked, they see what's the name of your dog or something like that, and they couldn't answer it because it wasn't the CFO, and so that procedural sort of um, trust, if that makes sense, because you can't trust based on familiarity now. The verification has to become not emotional, if that makes sense. And so that was really important. And you got to start adding stuff like that in there, or you're gonna get got, if that makes sense. Definitely interesting. So now we're moving on from risk to strategic value. And this is where we're sort of talking about the MSP journey and viewing it as like a maturity curve. At the reactive level, a lot of providers sort of operate in break-fix mode, and as they progress, deploy tools and begin standardizing security across the client environments. Mike, is there anything you want to take here on?
Yeah, I mean, and Dan, you talk to MSPs every day. I mean, you're seeing more and more get down to that for like that advisory, and you could see that there's really no tools itself that are going to win this war, especially if we get into AI, right? So, what is the value add of working with an MSP? It's not just the tool set; it's the advisory component of this that's going to keep you updated on what the threats are, but also putting these protocols into place. And to me, that's where profitability is going to come from. As everybody's using similar stacks, that's not really a differentiator, but the value you can add is in once you get to layer 3 or layer 4 of this maturity curve, where now you're adding your expertise and the planning and the standardization and all those things, and even project work when it comes to AI. It's going to open the door to a lot of revenue streams as well. But I think the folks that aren't moving up this maturity curve are going to have a really tough time competing in the market moving forward, because this is where the opportunity is.
For sure.
Yeah, and that the tools are important, but that maturity component, that's where that stickiness comes into play, and that is truly where you become sticky and you have a customer for life.
Yeah, and you get promoters. If you've got the relationship with your partner, your client, they're going to refer you just because I know an expert. I know a Tyler Moffitt who showed me all these things. It will be organic referrals you'll get out of this.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about operational efficiency through standardization, helping the MSPs to scale, consolidating tools, integrating telemetry, reduce operational complexity, allowing you to respond to threats faster, for sure. And so we have pulled up some interesting stats here that sort of reinforce the importance for this. And, the alerts and faster triage, that's huge. I mean, how many of you guys are running on alert fatigue? Or have too many security tools and tabs open? I mean, I'm sure those are complaints every day that everybody runs into. Mike, if you have anything, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been the conversation in MSP study after MSP study, right? Like standardizing on your stack, reducing the vendor sprawl, making sure everything integrates with one another, knowing when to outsource or when to bring things in house. Build out your own SOC or outsource that. It's critical. It's scalable. I mean, if you're not doing that, it's almost impossible to scale.
Yeah. And finishing off with security as a business enabler. So, when MSPs mature their security capabilities, the conversation shifts from technology to business outcomes, for sure. Mike, feel free. This is your area.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the transition from being an MSP to a BSP, a business solutions provider, and that is leveraging all these things, in terms of filling out a cybersecurity insurance form with somebody, but explaining why that checkbox exists, why do insurance companies talk about it, warranties, compliance, all of these things are such an opportunity for the MSPs to show their value. And then you're talking about business outcomes and not just the speeds and feeds of whatever under your hood.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, that brings us to the sort of top 10 MSP security baseline checklist. And, this is sort of, what you want to do, right? If you implement these controls, you're going to be well positioned to protect both your clients and like own your operations, right? So MFA everywhere, prevent resource misuse, conditional access. That's huge. DNS and layered endpoint solutions makes sense. Advanced email filtering, security awareness training. I mean, we're talking layered security solution here, right? Immutable backups. That's huge. Making sure that they cannot be modified whatsoever. No matter what happens to the environment, you still have access to them. Automated update, patch management. These are all really huge. Hardening your RMM setups and, the security posture of your vendors. Last thing you want is like a supply chain attack on yourself, right? Where you've done everything right and eaten all your cybersecurity vegetables, but your vendors can't. That's definitely a problem. And then tabletop exercises, right? It's one thing to talk a big talk and communicate how overconfident you are, and then when it comes down to actually doing it, you're running around with your head cut off. As we've seen, that gap there is pretty strong and widening, and that is what we're talking about. And so make sure you actually do the dry run, do the rehearsals, pretend all of a sudden you can't access this or you don't have access, and what can you do from there? These are really important stuff. And that brings us down to sort of the key takeaways of this webinar. Thank you everybody for joining. Making sure that you understand MSPs are actually prime targets. You have the best return on investment for these criminals. You've got entire groups dedicated just to target you. Identity is the new control. It's the new perimeter for sure. And you want to make sure that standardization is what enables MSPs to scale securely, operate efficiently. When it comes to ransomware, resilience and recovery capabilities, ultimately define client trust, right? And preparedness matters more than perfection, right? What counts is the ability to respond and recover effectively, right? Cyber resilience isn't, about never getting hit, right? It's about staying standing, after you are hit, if that makes sense. And so that's it for our presentation. If you guys aren't aware of a secure cloud, this would be the security offerings that we offer. And so OpenText made secure cloud is like the cybersecurity umbrella, if you will, of wherever you are, wherever your stack is, wherever you're missing a layer of security, we've got a SKU for you, if that makes sense. And of course, Microsoft involvement as well. And so I believe we're done buying up a whole bunch of different companies to have all these different layers. We have everything we need, I think, as far as full coverage. Let me know, Mike, if there's anything different. But we have basically wherever you're at in your journey, we've got offerings for you. And I'm not a sales guy or anything like that, so I don't know too much about bundling, but we're very competitive, if that makes sense. And one thing I wanted to offer as well and show you guys is I run a community. So if you are interested, or you are a customer or partner or use any one of our products, we have tons of information you might want to know as far as on the actual community, where I run a threat intel hub where I publish whatever you want to talk about. Security industry breaking news, threat reports is going to live there, security perspectives as things change, obviously AI threats and security, exploits and vulnerabilities is popping off right now, and then Fish Tank. I actually have the manager of who manages our email product. He actually provides example phishing emails directly from the networks and devices we protect. So what people are encountering, and uses them as examples and writes regular emails using that. So I'll go and steal his examples that he's pulled directly from the networks and our own telemetry, and provide them, because it's really good to have actual examples of what we're seeing in the wild. And he posts regularly there as well. It's really just a nice thought leadership hub, if that makes sense. But beyond that, we also have resources you would need depending on whatever product you might use or you're interested in. Whether you're just a prospect, you can click on any one of these products and have success toolkits and how to set them up correctly. You can have video libraries to make sure you're getting the most out of what the capabilities are. And if you're just prospective, there's case studies and data sheets and infographics to make sure you can get not just our opinion and our word for it, but actual customers who have used it to their benefit. And so thank you everybody for joining. Here's some QR codes. I know we got I believe you said you had some links in chat, or maybe shared with them, I believe. Okay, cool.
We have some links in the chat to the reports. So be sure to grab that. Also, on our YouTube channel, which we included a link in the chat, we will have the replay of this, so you can rewatch it, share it with other people in your organization. And with that being said, gentlemen, I greatly appreciate your time. There we go. And all of your knowledge. And thank you. Any parting words from either of you?
I would say, look, you guys saw how passionate Tyler is about this stuff. Go to that community page, save it in your favorites, because you're going to get something new every day. And it's obviously not salesy at all. It's all just about education. You could use it for your clients, use it for your team. I would set that as something you just check on every day and see what's new.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody check out the community. But other than that, educate yourself. The landscape's always changing. AI is definitely a huge acceleration factor into that. But just keeping yourself abreast, because it never stops, and it looks like it's only gonna change more dramatically as time goes on. And I'm here for it. So happy to talk to
Awesome.
anybody who wants to talk about it.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and we greatly appreciate your time. Until next time, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks a lot, everybody.